that'll keep climbing. So I'm Alan Forrest Smith, author, writer. I've written 20 books. Probably the first book I wrote was Escape from Humanity, and the last book I wrote was a book called The Accidental Copywriter, and I'm working on a couple of books right now. So obviously the whole purpose of this chat is to kind of go through a couple of ideas and discussions every week just on the subject of writing. And I'm assuming that you're on this call because you either want to be a writer or at some point you're thinking about being a writer and you want to become an author. So this week's subject is writing versus editing. What's the difference? The difference is actually huge, to be honest. I was trying to think of the best way to kind of explain this, because as writers, what we tend to do is we tend to do everything on our own or alone. That's what we tend to do. And the problem with that is all the input is just our input. It's not anybody else's input at all. So we tend to be isolated in a corner, in a room, somewhere, and we just write. That's a good thing. And it can be a bad thing also. I'm a huge believer in that if you want to write a book, if you have a big idea, you just sit there and you write the whole thing. You get it written and you get it out there. And once the whole thing is done, then you can go back and edit the whole thing. So if you're writing a book, my advice is just write the book. If you listen to any other kind of authors or experts on this subject also, they will tell you the same. Just get the book written. Now, I mentioned this on one of the other calls. I'll mention it again for those who weren't there. When I wrote my first published book, a properly published book through a publisher, I wrote that book from start to finish. And then I took the book to the publisher. I sent the book to the publisher. And the first thing he said to me is, where's all the breaks? Where's the chapters? Where's the headings? Where's this? And there was nothing there. It was just one continuous document of 40,000 words. Now, the problem is with that is, for us, it seems fine because we wrote it and we understand it. And we should do that process. We should write the book because we understand what we're writing anyway. But the problem with that is readers won't really understand the same as we understand also. And this is where we invite editors into our book process. Now, there are some amazing editors out there. But quite honestly, especially online, there are some terrible editors. Just like there's some amazing writers and there's some terrible writers also. So what's the difference? Well, you can have something called a development editor. Now, a development editor will help you develop your idea. So for instance, although I'm a writer and an author, I still work with new writers and help them to develop their idea. So that gives you more of an idea what this development editor is. I'm not an editor, by the way, but I do work on development. What that really means is we may have an idea or a concept of something we like the idea of doing. So we may be thinking, okay, well, this will be cool. This is a cool idea. I'm going to sit down, I'm going to write about it. I had this idea about self-isolation as an example. And I want to develop this idea of self-isolation and do X, Y, Z with it. That's what I want to do. But we're not quite sure how to develop the idea. And this is where we approach something called a developmental editor. That is someone who we would go to and we say, look, I've got this idea. I'm an okay writer or I'm a great writer. And some of the best writers will even go to these editors. We'll go to these editors and say, what do you think? And a development editor, they'll give you more idea on the ideas. They maybe help you to develop facts and find facts on that idea. They may help you to find more structure within your book. For example, I saw a book just the other week. Somebody sent me this book the other week and they said, Alan, what do you think about this particular book? Will you have a look at it? So he sent his book through and I had a quick glance through his book and read a couple of chapters. But the problem was there was no structure to the book. There was an idea from here, there was an idea from there. It was just kind of thrown in together. and generally the structure was very, very poor. So I actually thought his book was really good, but at the same time, I thought structurally it didn't really work. It just didn't really work at all. So in fact, he needed to develop his book. And that's what a developmental editor will do. So you still write the book, and then you get one of these niche editors, these particular editors, to come in and help you to develop that book. But say you've written your book and you've got a little bit further on and you have your what we call our manuscript. So just to be clear, what's a manuscript? So if I write a new book, and at the moment I've got a new book which is about 120,000 words in total, which is about 400 pages roughly, something like that. So before I do any work on that book, I will print off that book. And when I print it off, that is my manuscript. It isn't finished, but that is the manuscript. So we then have our manuscript, and what do we do with this? Well, we go to a manuscript editor. Now, honestly, these guys can be ruthless. I had a manuscript editor completely destroy one of my books once, and we fell out over this, and we were okay in the end, but we fell out over this. And basically, they took my book from me, and I got the book back, and I couldn't even recognize it being the same book. It was completely different. So I sent them, if I'm correct, it was about 103,000 words. This book came back at 30,000 words. Some of the paragraphs, it didn't even sound like me. And this was a manuscript editor. So with these guys, you have to be very, very careful, because you get your manuscript and you hand it to them and you say, have a look through this and do some work on it for me. And they will say to you, yeah, I'll do that for you. I'll get this manuscript sorted. We'll make it look and sound amazing. They will work on things like characters. So sometimes if you're working on a book with lots and lots of characters, remember, you can't just say there's John and there's Steve and there's Jane and there's Sharon and everybody else. You can't just say that. You have to develop the character. So if you've got 10 characters in your book, you have to have 10 characteristics of 10 characters. And this is what a manuscript editor, if they're good, will be really good at. They will come back to you and they will say, yeah, look, Alan, I loved the main character of the book. I thought it was great, although we can develop that a little bit more. But two of these characters I didn't like because I didn't know them. I couldn't get to know them. There wasn't enough being said about them. So, for instance, the book I'm working on right now is it's a big family drama, and there's about maybe 15 characters were named in this book. I could have just written about individuals and just mentioned them quite easily. But in the end, and actually I did it first. And after printing the manuscript, I thought, you can read about these stories of what these guys are doing, but you don't really know anything about the person. So I had to go back to each character one at a time and dedicate my next portion of writing to that individual character. So who was that character? What had that character been through? What turned the character into who they are right now? There had to be a reason that the character was who they are in the book. Because remember, if you have characters in a book, in a story, you need, say for example, conflict characters. So you need somebody here who will say something the opposite to someone here, which creates a conflict. She says this, she says that, and it's a conflict. But why are they conflicting? So we have to build up the characters to an extent where we can really understand, we can really see, and the reader knows exactly who that character is. And of course, there's other things like the plot. Your plot may have holes, and I've written books where somebody said to me, Alan, it was good, but I missed this. I didn't like this, a story. So you look back and you go, yeah, they are right. There was a hole in the plot. So a manuscript editor will find these kind of things out for you. They will find out the holes, they'll find out the characteristics, they'll find out all these different things. And yes, you have to have them. You do need to use them. But I always advise using one very lightly. So the book that you wrote with your personality and your writing style doesn't come back sounding completely like a completely different person. That'd be crazy. So one thing I like to have manuscript editors for me personally, I think a weakness I have as a writer is my scene order. So although I have all the scenes written down and everything that I can see there and everything I can read there, sometimes this scene is in the wrong order. So I've been working on a book today and I pulled a scene back to the beginning. And I took one scene from the beginning and I put it maybe, well, quite a way into the book actually, this other scene. And then other scenes that I wasn't sure quite if they were quite correct, I put them to the very end of the book under my note section and I'll play with them later on. So I like a manuscript editor that can really help me to rearrange my scenes properly. And although you will think that your scenes and your book is amazing, because we all do, these independent people who are not really connected to your manuscript the same way that you are, they will find things that you may not find. But here's my advice for the manuscript editor. Ask them to do the minimum, ask them to do a sample, and ask them to send you the sample before you let them destroy your book. Because they'll either do an amazing job to your book or they'll completely annihilate the book. So you really need to see a test sample from them initially. Now, another thing I want to mention is the proofreader, because the proofreader is more the type of editor I like to use. A proofreader is not an editor. Yes, it's a type of editing, but they're not editors. A proofreader comes in and they check if there's an apostrophe missing, if there's a comma missing, for fluidity, coherence, connections, interconnections, staccato, writing, etc., etc. They will pick up that stuff. And they will pick up where you need to put power words in, where you've got completely flat and lifeless words, and other little bits and pieces like that. So they will go through the whole document and they will correct your mistakes. So this is a kind of editor I personally like to work with because I like the book to have my own voice. And really that's the difference between writing and editing. As a writer, let me just let someone in. As a writer, you have to remember this. It's your job to transport what you know onto paper. Transfer what you're thinking into a document. Download your thoughts and notes into a book. That's your job. It's not your job to edit anything, unless you're an editor who's writing a book, of course. But we're talking about writers versus editors, two different compartments. So it's your job as a writer to do that, to write your book and to get your book written. So my advice to you on this chat this evening is really focus on your writing and get the writing done. That's what you have to do. If you have a book idea, last week I think, or the week before, we talked about memoirs and biographies, just get it down there. I mean, for example, in a biography, you may be talking about where you were born, but the proofreader might pick up the, you know what, it was strange, you didn't pick up the street. You didn't mention the number of the house. You didn't mention if it was a bungalow or a two down. In fact, you didn't mention anything. All you mentioned was the address of the house. So I would suggest to you is to give it more flavor, because it's like putting herbs into a soup. To give the story more flavor, add those details into the story. So as a writer, it's your job to write. If you are making a movie, it's your job to do the filming. You get the director to direct. You get the editor to edit it. You get the sound man to do the sound, and so on and so on. Writing is a specific that you as a writer should stick to. So, and then the editing is a completely different job. So if you've started your manuscript or you want to start it, you probably need a developmental editor. Of course, we can help you with that in masterman.com. If you need a manuscript editor, we can help you to find the right people for that also. Or if you want a proofreader is relatively easy to find online at the same time. So that's it, guys. What I'm going to do is, if you have any questions, let me just go on to the... I can't open up the audio because it goes a bit... With the audio, everybody gets lost in the audio. So I'm going to wait a couple of minutes. If you have a question, if you have a question, type your question in the question box. And if I can answer it, I'll answer it. If I can't answer it, I can't answer it. So type your question into the question box before we finish the little meeting. And don't forget, next week, we'll be talking about something else to do with getting your book together. And just make sure you're subscribed over at masterman.com to the newsletter so that you get notifications for these. So guys, I'm going to stay here just for 1 minute. If there's nobody asking a question, I'm going to finish the call. Anybody have a question? We've got 6 people on the call. Does anybody have a question regarding what we've talked about? Anyone at all? So we've talked about developmental editors, we've talked about manuscript editors, and we've talked about proofread editors. So any questions? Okay, guys, no questions coming up. That's fine. Let me just check once more. Okay. Check once more. Okay, Luke is asking what are the top tips for reviewing your own work. Well, look, what I do is I print it out and read it. That is a top tip I can give you, because when you read it on a screen, I'm always amazed how much different it looks actually on paper. You will see spelling mistakes, typos, and all different things on paper that you will not see on a screen. I've no idea why. And that is the absolute top tip I will give you for editing it. Another tip for editing your own work, another thing I do is I leave it for a few days and I go back to it and read it again. So last night I decided to edit the introduction to one of my latest books that we're just about to publish. And I wrote the new introduction to it, probably the third new introduction to it, maybe 2 weeks ago now. I still didn't feel that happy with it. So what I did is I decided to have a look again last night. This was about 10 o'clock last night. And I completely changed it. And I actually thought the last one was good enough. But I didn't like it. So the best thing to do is, if you're doing it yourself, print off, read it out, go through the paper with a pen. You'll see lots and lots more stuff in there. Doing it this way, write the stuff on the paper, read it out aloud if you have to, and then go back to the manuscript in a few days and have a look at it from a different set of eyes. Actually, I edit mine loads and loads of times. I mean, I don't know how many times. My big book at the moment is probably on its 5th edit easily, and it's a big book. All right, guys, any more questions? So we've got Manoj, Kate, Luke. We've got, I'm not sure, it just says Styling Addy, Twitter. Okay, Luke, thanks. Any more questions, anyone, before I go? So I'm going to do a countdown. 5, 4. I'm happy to answer the questions while I'm here. All right, guys. All right, guys. Happy writing, and just keep at it. Do not give up. You know where we are. This is Alan Forrest Smith. We are publishers, we are writers, we are authors, and we're there to help you guys get your first book on the shelf. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you same time next Tuesday. We'll see you then. Thanks, guys.